So obviously coming from Max, having a modifier stack in blenders, you know, it's going to be somewhat familiar. So this is the modifier panel here, this little spanner icon, and here's the modifier list. So it's not as extensive as Max by any means. And in the video here, I'm just going to go over the some of the basic sort of ones that you'd be used to in Max, like Bevel, which is like the chamfer modifier. Decimate, which is like optimize. Mirror, which is like symmetry. Remesh, which is like quadify mesh. Screw is like lathe. Solidify is like shell. Subdivision surface is like turbo smooth. Triangulate is like turn to poly. And then you have some other ones here, like lattice would be like an FFD. Smooth would be like the same as smooth and Max. Then you have like warp and wave, some of those ones, that the same type of ones you get in Max. And simple to form would be a combination of bend, twist, taper, and what's the other one? I can't remember the other one, but I'll show it there. I'm having a look at them. So as I say, yeah, I'll go over some of these. Now here's one that I'm desperately waiting on to have in Max, is Boolean. That's why we see all these add-ons in Blender. Hard Ops, a box cutter, Hard Ops, Cuber, Ice Tools, Fluent, Fast Carve. That's why they all work so well in conjunction with the Bevel Modifier, because Boolean is non-destructive here in Blender. It's because it's a modifier, so I'm really waiting on that in Max, and I know that the devs are it's in their mind anyway, so who knows in the future, but it's definitely needed in Max to be able to have the same type of workflow as all those add-ons I just mentioned in Blender. So we'll start off with an array modifier here as well, and you know, you can get some MCGs in Max, and then Key Hydra plugin has a linear clone modifier that's the same, and then there's a few scripts and things like that in Max, but it's in Blender here by default. So I'll apply the array, and it's just your average sort of array here. Set the count, have an offset, and then you can, you know, just offset it in your different axes. Just pretty standard stuff for the array modifier, and obviously we have array under tools in Max for the same sort of effect. So with modifiers here, just a few things about them. Firstly, the stack order is reversed to what it is in Max. It calculates the modifiers from the top down, so whichever modifier is on the bottom is going to be like the top of your stack in Max. So obviously these modifiers are dependent, just like a Max, as you stack them on top, depending on what order they're in the stack, they're going to have a different effect. And unfortunately, you can't apply modifiers to sub-object selections like you can in Max. And also then applying the modifier is just like collapsing the stack in Max, but you can't do that in edit mode or sub-object mode. You have to do it in object mode. So that's the basics. There's not much to it. Like the likes of these, you know, you just play around with them, and you know, you'll suss them out quick enough yourself. There's a nice weighted normal modifier here in normal edit as well. Max is badly in need of one of these as well. Face weighted vertex normal, or even any sort of non-destructive way to work with explicit normals is also badly needed in Max. But let's not talk about that. We're here to talk about Blender. So that's the array modifier. I'm just gonna, you can delete the modifier here, and you can also this button here, you won't see it in this, but if I go into edit mode, you can just turn it on and off in edit mode, like sub-object mode, and then you can adjust the cage on it there, like. So I'll just delete that one with this X, and I'm going to go back to object mode, and then we'll take a look at the bevel modifier. So it's pretty much the same as Max's chamfer modifier. Well, not the new one, it doesn't have the same amount of features as Max's new one, but all the usual sort of stuff here. Your width, the clamp overlap is on here, so you see as it'll only go to a maximum, and then it'll just cut off. That's in the new 2020 chamfer modifier Max as well. I'll just go into edit mode, and you can see here now that that's displaying it in sub-object mode. You can do the same in Max, edit it in sub-object mode with a poly select on top of your editable poly and below the chamfer modifier. And I'll just go out of back into edit mode, put the wireframe on. You can see at the moment now, and just like in Max, when you apply the chamfer, it's not respecting smoothing groups by default, and you turn on unsmoothed edges in Max. So you can do the same here in Blender by just turning on angle, and now we can get a bit of a better idea here. I'm just going to click off. So segments, and then profile. You can go reverse in the profile like you can with the new Max chamfer modifier. Clamp overlap, seen that. Verts, that'll just chamfer the verts. Mark sharps and harden normals. Usually as well you'd apply the weighted normals modifier just to clean up any surface shading. Bevel modifier on more complex kind of meshes, like maybe Boolean meshes. So the limit method, so obviously that applies it to everything. That's based on this angle here. Weight, if I go into edit mode, and I'm just gonna set these, and I'll just open up the end panel here, and sorry, where is it? Mean bevel weight edges, and then I'll just gonna set these to 1, so you can see that's like Max's chamfer weighting, edge weighting. So you can do it that way as well. You know, if angle isn't obviously doing it for you, you can go in there individually and set it up with your weights, edge weights. I'll just press N to close that down. The width method is just, you know, it's just going to change based on which ones it is you pick. Set face strength mode, I'm not too sure, I haven't really played around with that. And these miter patterns are fairly new as well in Blender, and similar to some of the ones in Max, the new 2020, so you can mess around with them. So that's pretty much the basics of the bevel modifier. So next I'll have a look at I might save the Boolean for another video there. Decimate is just, as I said, like optimize. Pretty straightforward sort of stuff there as well. And edge split is an interesting one that it was sort of deprecated. People used to use it to split up their smoothing groups, but sort of deprecated in Blender. But I've discovered a normal map baking method where you just use a single low poly. You don't need a high poly mesh to bake from. You can use the bevel shader, and the edge split is what makes it work. So I'm not going to go into that here. The mirror modifier is like symmetry. I'll show that in a few minutes there, with a box probably instead of a cylinder. Remesh is just like quantify mesh, so you know you can set it up like this, same way, and you can change the size in the quantify mesh modifier Max. And what else have we got? Screw is like lathe, so I'll just delete this cylinder, and I'll just press 7 to go into top view. Or sorry, I press 1 to go into front view. So before I show the screw, I'm going to talk about, like, Max's spline tools are the best probably of any of the 3D packages, and unfortunately there's nothing that comes even close in Blender to them. So I tend to use, if I just shift A and create a Bezier curve, it's created a huge, so I'll just press S and scale it down. These are the curves that Blender creates. This would be similar to Max's spline, but you can't just draw it out like a line like you can in Max. It always comes in as this weird sort of curve shape. So if I tab into edit mode, you see we have, you know, the same sort of controls that you'd expect. I'm just pressing G and then I'm pressing R to rotate, and you can get rid of these weird hairy things here by coming down. This will be context sensitive, so here's curve edit mode, and you can turn off the handles or those weird normals, make them bigger, smaller, just make them go away altogether, which is my preferred option. And then you can select your verts here and just press E and then R. Like, it's actually you know, it's a pretty decent way of doing it, but it's just weird the way it creates that. They're not as controllable as Max. You have all your different handles, but you can still I'm not sure if you can break the handles. I haven't used curves too much because I'd rather use polygon objects with a turbo smooth, or sorry, with a Subsurf modifier. So I might go over them again in another video, curves, but I'll just delete that for the moment and press 1 to go into front, and press Q, that's my quick favorites, plane, tab to go into edit mode, all the verts are selected, and then Alt M is merge, and then I can go at center, which is just like collapsing all the verts into a single vert. And this is where it gets interesting in Blender, where you can just have a single vert in space, and then, as I showed in an earlier video, you can just drag them out, extrude them out. And the funny thing is, then you can add Subsurf Modifier, and you can also do that by, I'll just delete that, Control 2 is the hotkey for that, Control 2. And now I'm going to edit mode, and we have our cage, press 1 for verts, and then you know, this is how I prefer to create curves. And then there's a few scripts, a script called Quick Pipe that allows you to, the way in Max you can set your splines to renderable in the viewport and in the render. That's how you get around that quick pipe, but you can also do it if I tab into edit mode, or sorry, tab into object mode and come to objects, convert mesh from curve or curve from mesh. So go curve from mesh and come down here into the properties of it. That's your object data, and then you can see down here under geometry rollout, bevel, and then we can give it some thickness. So that's how you can do that. But I'll go back to what I was talking about. The screw modifier was supposed to be, so into modifiers, tab into edit mode, just go 1 again to go to front, and I'll delete that for the moment, and I'll add the screw. And because we created this in the front view, it's defaulted here to Z, so I'm going to change that to Y, and then flip, and now we have our expected result that you might get from lathe. So the reason it's called screw, first and foremost, is this screw slider here. You know, it behaves like a screw, I suppose, a helix type shape, and then you have your angle here where you can do a cutaway, and your segments there, and smooth shading or faceted or flat shading. And then you can still, this is still editable, so I'll tab back into edit mode. I can still move these around, and then we can also so I'll grab that top one there, I'll grab these two actually, and I'll just move them back over here, and then I'll grab this one, move it up, and now I can press E to extrude again, and it's going to be able to edit it like that. I could also then Control B and then V, and we can bevel the verts then. So that's the screw. So it's interesting that you can work with topology like that. That would be illegal in Max, like extruding verts in space, or just having a single vert in space and be able to extrude edges from that. So it's an interesting concept, and we have some flip normals there, but not to worry about it. So that's the screw modifier, and I'll just re-add that subdivision surface modifier on again, and then I'll add solidify, and solidify is just like the shell modifier in Max, and you can see there it's added thickness, and I'm not going to go into too much into depth on them. You can see the stack here, and we can move things up and down the stack. So if I move solidify up, that's going to calculate before the Subsurf modifier at the end. And our Subsurf modifier, I'll just close the screw down. Solidify, you know, it's just like Max's shell. You can go negative and positive. Flip the normals, even thickness, and that's just like straightening the corners in Max. And then there's crease here, inner and outer, and rim. So that's pretty basic stuff. And then this is even more basic, the Subsurf modifier, render and viewport iterations, just like we have in Max. And that's pretty much it for them. So next up we go over the lattice modifier, and the lattice modifier one's a bit funny. You have to, there's a way to set it up, so you know you might add a lattice and then you know nothing really happens. There's no settings. Lattice is just like FFD and max. So what you have to do is Shift A, and then you actually have to create a lattice, and you can see it's created down here. And I'll just press GZ to move it up, and pressing Shift Z to go into wireframe, and then SX to scale it in the X, and then SZ to scale it in the Z, and GZ to move it down a bit. And I'm just going to flip around to this side, and I'm going to scale it out here as well in the Y, so SY, and I'm basically just scaling it out to so it envelopes or encompasses our mesh here. So with the lattice selected, I'll go down here into the object data, and you can see now, we can see these settings here. So this will be like FFD box where you can up your segments here. So I'll bring that one up a bit more. Not that one. I'll bring the height up a bit more. And now what you have to do is select your object width and go into the modify panel, and then with the lattice modifier applied to your object, you can pick in the scene, and we'll pick our lattice. And now if we choose our lattice and press tab to go into edit mode, you can see that the lattice now has those control verts, and then it's linked up to this object through the lattice modifier. So the lattice modifier has to be pointed towards a lattice object, and then I'll just Shift Z, and I'll just select these verts, and now if I scale them, you can see it's working like a lattice. And then I can also press O, and that's going to activate proportional editing, which is like soft select in Max, which I'll show probably in another video. And now if I press S, it's scaling. You can see that it's affecting the fall off with that circle. So I'm mouse wheeling now, so the fall off, you can do it dynamically on the fly. So proportional editing in Blender is really good. I prefer it a lot more than Max's soft selection. So that's pretty much, and press O to turn off proportional editing again. That's pretty much how the lattice or FFD modifier works. But there's an easier way to do it, because it's a bit crazy that you have to set it up like that. So I'll just delete that lattice, and I'll get rid of that modifier off our cylinder, and I press N, and you see I have these Maxiv's interactive tools. Maxi Vasquez, he's created these interactive tools, ported them to Blender. He's a Max user who originally created these in Max, not the exact same tools, but you can see a lot of like quick FFD, then there's target weld and quick pivot, edit pivot. These are sort of things he's brought over. Wireframe shading, which you'll miss from Max and Blender. I just have that hotkey to F1, you can see here. If I just press F1, that's going to just turn on and off the wireframe toggle shaded like you have in Max. So you can see here this quick FFD. If I just click, select the object and quick FFD, and press N to get rid of that, you can see now that's sort of done the work behind the scenes. And I'll just go back out of edit mode and select the lattice and go down here, and now we can do the same. And we basically, it's already set up there. So select the lattice, tab into edit mode, and just as before there, I'll just press O. You don't have to press O, but I'm just doing it because it gives you more control. And now I'll press G, and you can see the fall off then is affected, proportional editing. So I'll press O again, and that's pretty much the easier way to create. It's automatically done for you with that. So you should definitely check out that set of interactive tools. Some really handy ones here. I'll definitely do a video about this in the future, but I'll leave it at that for the moment. And I'll just X to get rid of that lattice. And lastly, now I think you'll leave it at the last one to show. I'll select the object and back to the modifier panel, and I'll delete that lattice modifier that was added by the quick FFD, and I'm going to select the simple deform. So it defaults here to twist. We we can select our different axis, and if I turn on wireframe, you can see it's just like Max's twist modifier. And then you can turn on to bend, and again select our axis. And you know, you might think it's behaving sort of strangely. It's going around the pivot there. So what you have to do, just like with the lattice modifier, you have to create another object to point it to. See this axis origin. So if I just snap into the top view there and Shift A, and I'll just create an empty and a plain axis like a dummy in Max, and it's just created here at the origin. And now if I go back to that Simple Deform modifier, and I'll just select our empty from the scene, now it's using the empty as the origin. So if I select that empty, I can press G and move it around, or I can press R and then Z, and that's going to rotate the empty and in turn control the bend. So that's two things that are sort of strange at first. You're not expecting them. You just expect the lattice to work straight off and the bend, but these are two things I found out the hard way, and that's pretty much what you have to do for those. So taper's just, you know, it's basic, the same as it is in Max. Nothing too fancy there. And just bear in mind, these are all in the same modifier, so when you're changing settings around, it's going to change them globally when you switch between these. And then you have stretch, which is like, I can't remember in Max, but it's like one of them, I can't remember the name. So that's pretty much modifiers, I think, the basics of them. You can play around with these other ones yourselves. I'm not going to go into any more of them. Weighted normal is a really nice one in conjunction with the Bevel Modifier. So I think I'll leave it at that now. It's gone on a bit long, and yeah, just have a mess around yourself there. Alright then, cheers, thanks, good luck.